How's it going, everybody? My name's Trey Cockrum. In today's video, I'm talking about why it is that I believe every man or woman who's made at least $100,000 a year profit after tax, after expenses, and everything should seriously consider buying a nice timepiece. Should buy a Rolex, an entry-level Rolex, or something like this. And why I'm such a huge fan of watches, and why I've probably bought at least $400,000 worth of watches, and what it's done for me, and why I think it's so fun. And so I'm gonna try and navigate this video without coming off as too arrogant or too, up my own what. But at the same time, I really do think that it's added a lot of value in my life, and it's helped me lean into a certain identity. And when you get to a certain point, you realize that it's all identity. The strategies, the methods, the tactics, the physical stuff, it just comes to you when you have the right identity and the right alignment. When you have the right concept of yourself and the right view of who you are, then most things just fall into place. And so my most recent pickup is this Patek Philippe Nautilus. It's got Roman numeral dials, and it's a blast to wear. And some people have pointed out it's cool. I'll be like on a sales call or something, and like somebody that wants to maybe do business with us points it out and says, "Oh, it's a really cool watch. Like I've got one myself," and it's just like a conversation piece. So I'm gonna make a pretty just case as to why you should do it. Now, let me say this: about 3 months ago, maybe 4 months ago, I tried to take the high road, and I tried to say, "Look, I'm just gonna get rid of my watches, and it's too materialistic, and I'm a devout Christian, and so there's some theological worldviews that I've still got some questions as to how some of my beliefs about what money is spiritually tie into this belief about nice things and watches and stuff." And so I'm not claiming to have all the answers there. I'm not claiming that I'm like some sort of a spiritual guru. I'm not claiming to have all the answers, especially for my Christian brothers and sisters. Like those of you who are succeeding in business, who are of same faith to me, you can make your own discernment. You can make your own decision as to whether this is something that you want to do yourself or not. I'm just going to talk from my personal experience and what has worked for me. So what's worked for me has been just surrounding myself with objects or things that remind me of who I am. So it's very interesting. Some of the worst times in my business are when I'm in an environment that isn't conducive to the identity of who I'm becoming. Okay, and this is why I will always spend money on a nice apartment. This is I think it's like $3,500 a month. It's not that expensive, really. It's actually pretty good for what we're getting, because my wife and I still live in Indianapolis, which is Indiana. It's where we grew up. We're planning on maybe moving somewhere. I don't know. I'm not in any hurry to do it. But I want the nice windows. I want natural light. I want to drive a car that makes me feel the part, and I want to wear something that makes me feel the part. And so I've noticed that a lot of very wealthy individuals, they don't care at all about the strappings. And so maybe there's something I need to mature past. I don't know. I am ultimately 23 years old, and this is just how I think. But when I have something specifically on my wrist, when I have a nice timepiece that is reserved for the men and women who have become something worthy of wearing that piece, then it does something for me. And so if you've never read the book Psycho-Cybernetics, I highly recommend it, because it talks about how everything you do comes from who you believe you are. And who you believe you are is really the filter through which outer stimulus, which is the happenings of the outer world, are rolled through to create your opinion of the happening. So for example, in our higher level mastermind program, which my YouTube does not exist to sell you anything. I'm purely here just to add value to people, help people out. My business will do $6 to $8 million this year, whether I make YouTube content or not. Okay, it's not what I'm here to do. But for one of my higher level mastermind programs, it's called the Scaling Blueprint. We have these in-persons 3 times a year. And the last one was at Tulum, Mexico, and I was telling my clients, and maybe my editor can put in a clip, I don't know. But what happens in the outer world is only through an opinion that is then or a bias that then causes an opinion about the thing. So what happens out here is irrelevant to what actually the reality is. You can pick what you want something to be. And I know I'm sounding a little mysterious and woo, but this has really helped me. Say for example, if a client wants a refund or they want out, your innate primal nervous system wants to respond to that with, oh frick, what did I do wrong, or something's wrong with me, or something's wrong with the business, or whatever. Your innate state of mind as a human being is scarcity. Because for the longest time, as humans, we lived in scarcity. We lived in fight or flight, which is why, when your wife walks around the corner, you're scared by her, and it's just your wife, right? We live in that almost reactive mode, and so it takes a lot of mindfulness and practicing mindfulness and practicing, self-awareness of your own thoughts for something that, when it happens out here, it doesn't affect what's happening in here. You create almost. I saw Alex Ramosa use this example. He was like, you want to be like a Yeti in a mug, right? Where like what's happening outside, whether it's hot or cold, doesn't affect the temperature inside. You're completely stonewall protected. So how do watches play into that for me? Well, they play a big part in that. For me, one of the biggest roles of a nice timepiece is kind of that protective barrier. Like if something happens out here, it's like, whatever, man. I've got this like, $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 watch or whatever. I've got this piece on my wrist. It's like, this is who I am. This doesn't represent who I am, right? So if you can separate what's happening in your outer environment from your opinion of yourself, that's really when you have a lot of power. Because your opinion of yourself, if you can have a certain opinion of yourself over enough time, your life will catch up to that opinion. Your life will actually catch up to that view of yourself. And this is just the most fascinating thing. And I've played with this. Force, if you would call it that. I've read books like Psycho-Cybernetics, Reality Transurfing, As a Man Thinketh by James Allen, and many other works in regards to your personal psychology. And I think it's where I've gotten the most benefit. And, in building an environment that is conducive to the sort of person that I see myself as at a core level, that maybe misaligns with who I see myself as, but adds maybe weight to that new person, I create the ability to have a positive bias in regards to what's happening in my outer world. So if something happens, say an important team member leaves, right? This happens to all of us. If you're running a business, an important team member is going to leave, or they're going to start to compete with you, or maybe, somebody who, once spoke highly of you now speaks negatively of you, or somebody who you trusted slights you, or maybe, you thought you were going to have a great quarter and you had a terrible quarter. These things are just things. It's your bias that turns them into, I am blank, or that means that I must be this. I'm a failure, or I am bad at this certain thing. And so for me, a watch is almost just it's not like a car where you have to go and use it. It just hangs out on you, right? It just hangs out on you, and you don't have to think about it. And it's just sitting there, and for me, it subliminally sends a message to my subconscious and says, you're that guy. And that might sound a little, it might sound like a crutch to some people, and maybe it is. Maybe it is a crutch, right? Because some people, maybe they do have that deeply instilled, built-in value. I don't yet. I was broke at 17 years old. I had $300 in the bank, right? Like nothing to my name. And I was homeschooled, and which has its advantages and its disadvantages. And I dropped out of homeschool. So I didn't even finish homeschool, okay? No degree. Been in a high school building, 5 times out. I'm trying to keep it less than 5 because, I think it's so funny to say, on one hand, I can count how many times I've been in public school, 5 times. Didn't go to college. And the only thing I really had going for me was just an entrepreneurial home. So they really encouraged me to do my own self-studies, which I think is probably the biggest blessing my parents gave me, which was just at the end of the day, we know you can fix it. Now, when I first dropped out and I first went off and did my own thing, we look back on it and we laugh, which is great, but my mom hated it. So I really went against a lot of and all of my friends were convinced that I was going to fail and everything, and I really went against a lot of, not physical forces, but for lack of a better term, very spiritual forces of rejection, and forces of people not believing in me in the way that I believed in myself, and forces of people speaking things over me that I didn't appreciate, and a lot of things like that. And it's very natural when you're leveling up, when you're growing. People don't always like to see that you're growing out of the environment that they're in, and you're becoming more in the same environment. And I can only empathize with that, because at the same time, look, if somebody were in my circle and they went on to just blast off, I'd be pretty upset as well. So I get it. Because your ego is involved, right? The human ego is such a powerful force. So now today, because of some of those scars and some of those things that people spoke over me, which is crazy because I came from an entrepreneurial home and I had everything going for me. And I should have succeeded, but those things people were saying really, really damaged my self-image and my psyche. So I really do need things in my environment that remind me of who I am. Okay, that aren't just how my business is doing that week. Because sometimes you have to make decisions for your company or your business that don't benefit the week. Sometimes you're doing things that are like 2 or 3 years out, or you're thinking a decade out, or you're thinking long ways, and you're not always going to have that immediate benefit. You're not always going to have that proof of concept that the money's rolling in and it's profitable and you're making bags. Like, it's not always going to be there, so you need things, and so that's what watches do for me. So I think that if you are an individual who has come into some level of success, whether you're a young individual or you're a middle-aged individual or whatever it may be, I really think that you need to try out having a nice watch on. And if it doesn't have the same effect for you, that's totally fine. This is not a hill I'm going to die on, but it definitely has that effect for me. It reminds me of who I am, and it gives me that ability, it's almost like, you know, in negotiations, the person who needs the thing the least always wins the negotiation. So whether this is in a romantic relationship, right, or it's in like a business relationship or whatever, like that person always wins because they have the power because they need the thing the least. And for me, having a nice watch on, it's like, do I really care if this, like, I guess I really don't. I would really like it to go well because, like, that'd be nice. It almost detaches you from the thing. And I've found that when I attach too much importance to something and when I need it to work out too well, I disable my own creative mechanism in my own brain that is in charge of solving problems. You know, my subconscious becomes inundated with what ifs and oh no's and, you know, obsessed with the negatives of what may potentially appear. And so if I don't have that feeling of like having made it and I'm that guy, then a lot of the times something that happens out here can then affect what's in here, and then I create like that unfortunate negative bias. And I've experienced it. So like every time that my business is growing, it's because I'm on that positive mental bias. When it shrinks, it's because I'm on that negative mental bias. And so you really just have to understand that there's a lot of power here. So that's why I wear watches. This is all psychological. It's just a reminder of who I am. So if you want my advice, go into a Rolex dealership. Go into, particularly Rolex is a great place to start. I wouldn't recommend other brands. I started with a Rolex dealer. I called around. I asked around if anybody had any Daytonas, two-tone, steel, whatever. And I got really lucky that one had a Daytona. I said, I'll be in there like in 2 hours. Showed up, paid in full, no questions asked. This was like in 2020. You can go back and see that video where it's me and my girlfriend buying a Daytona, and she's now my wife, which is a beautiful thing, and I love her so much. So there's that. And then you'll just show that you're a real player, and you'll show that, you know, you actually are very serious about this, and then they'll start giving you nicer pieces. And I didn't buy this from my dealer. You know, they're a Rolex dealer. They don't sell Patek. But every now and again, they'll call me and say, hey, we've got a piece for you, and I'll come in and I'll go and I'll buy it. And, you know, I'm very, like, pretty much anything that they're going to send me, I'm going to buy pretty much whenever. Because, you know, I'm very loyal to them, not just Rolex as a brand, but also my dealer, because I love my dealer. I've only ever bought approved watches through that one dealer. And it might not be the best way to do things, but it's how I do it because I'm a very loyal person, and I consider my relationships to be my most important asset. So that's why I think that you should get into watches. If you've made at least $100,000, why you should buy a watch, okay? If you have any questions about any of this, just let me know. Happy to answer any questions, because to me, having been raised in the faith and having been especially a Christian, I had a view of wealth that was distorted. And this, again, coming from a somewhat entrepreneurial home too. This is a very fascinating thing for a lot of people to hear. Like, I grew up, you know, I'd say upper middle class. Like, I grew up, you know, we had a lot of our bills paid. There was only one season that really kicked me into entrepreneurship, which was we went through a house fire as a family, and you know, we made it through, but I wasn't sure what the future looked like, and it really just spurred me into action as a young man. Maybe you can relate to that feeling of, you know, seeing your family go through something. And was making a bunch of money really going to help? Probably not, because like my dad's a pretty good guy and like he figured it out and everything, but I didn't like that feeling of being incapable of doing anything. And so that's, I think, one of my major motivators, is just to create and sustain that peace of mind for myself and for my family. And so getting a little personal there, but yeah, hopefully this video is valuable to you. This is why I think you should buy watches. This is why I think you should get into it. And hopefully you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one.